I was finding a fairly decent level of success in my business. And then it became a point of like almost having a bit of prove it energy of going against the grain and being able to be an entrepreneur and have a business that's successful while also being a quote unquote stoner and being able to have weed as a regular part of my life. There was such a heavy nuance or stereotype of people that smoked weed being burnouts and losers and had nothing going for them and had no ambition and had no drive and just sat around and played video games and ate Cheetos all day. And I kind of wanted to single-handedly break that stereotype. This is A Day with Clay. Guys, thank you so much for being here today again on this video. Today we've made a little bit of a changes in the scenery. We changed the lights from blue to green because that's exactly what we're going to be talking about today. We're going to be talking about weed, aka marijuana. Some people love it, some people hate it. So what we're going to do is we're going to discuss it and figure out, is it killing our productivity or is it actually fueling our creativity to set us apart from everyone else in a marketplace? I'm going to talk about my history with smoking weed and a couple theories I have behind it. And according to experts, what it does to our brains. And then I'm going to compare that with my experience with smoking weed and where I'm at with it now. So weed is such a funny thing that over the last few years has definitely been changing in the public eyes and the public perception, especially now that there's government regulations and allowing it and making it legalized in some areas, in other areas just decriminalized. So through my teen years and my early 20s, I never really smoked a lot of weed. I tried it a couple of times as a teenager just for fun, but it usually messed me up pretty bad, so I didn't do it, which is often a mistake people make, is just doing too much of it. From my experience and hearing what other people say, it is one of the hardest substances to take and to deal with the consequences if you do take too much. Plus, when I was in my 20s, I often had jobs that required me to be able to pass a urine test that tested for marijuana if there was ever an incident or if I needed to switch job sites or get a new job altogether. So I just steered away from it because honestly, at the time, it just wasn't worth it. So I honestly didn't start smoking weed until I got into real estate, which was in 2017. That was a very stressful time for multiple reasons, financially being a big one, being a new realtor, living in a new city. I was living in Kelowna, British Columbia at the time. And by the way, my first year or two in real estate is a wild story. I'm going to tell that story and it's going to live right there when that's done. And then I made a friend with another realtor who happened to be a bit of a stoner and smoked weed every day. It's funny, I say the term stoner, but that's such a silly term. So anyways, I found that it was a very good tool while being in this stressful state to kind of shut your brain off and allow yourself to just forget about the stress and to fall asleep. Because there were nights where I was laying in bed, crunching numbers, wondering how I'm going to pay next month's rent or pay next month's mortgage, and all these things, running all these numbers in my head constantly and not being able to sleep. Then I look at the clock and it's 3 a.m. and I haven't gone to sleep yet because my brain's been stressed out. So then I started smoking weed. I had a little vaporizer pen, placeable cartridges with a little oil in it with THC, and I'd hit that little pen and it would take enough of the edge off that allowed me to go to sleep. Beautiful and seemingly harmless. So that trend carried on for a few more years, and slowly I started using it more and more. I found myself taking it with me when I was leaving the house. Sometimes it would just be one little tug, literally just to take the edge off, whatever that means. And not only that, but usually it felt pretty good. So once all the nonsense of 2020 happened, myself and a lot of people included found that they kind of found their tribe and found people that really resonated with them and were kind of on the same wavelength, for lack of better terms, and felt the same way about things and had the same or similar understandings of how things were operating. And it was funny because a lot of those people, now caveat, I have done other psychedelics before, mushrooms, I actually love mushrooms, and I'll eventually make a video about that and maybe a little right here as well. I think they're pretty game-changing and actually life-changing in a lot of scenarios. So the point being, a lot of times I would sit with these people that were kind of on the same wavelength, and if we smoked weed together, there would be a sensation that was similar to mushrooms where things were just an extra little bit heightened, which kind of led me down the road of kind of evolving a bit of a theory around weed and what it is. Going all the way back, and people were using it for medicinal purposes, and they would use it in like a ceremony setting to raise themselves away from the lower grasping evil spirits and to elevate themselves. And I think that was why they called it getting high, because you were elevating yourself and keeping yourself in a vibrational state away from the grasping claws of evil or those lower vibrational frequencies or entities or whatever it may be. So not to say relationships were formed around weed, but it definitely gave a little bit of an insight as to where they were vibrationally and where their souls were at. And on top of friendships, I found that it was very important, especially for me. I come from a family where I have one sister and I don't have any real brothers, but I'm so fortunate to have so many men in my life, whether they're my age or different ages or whatever, it doesn't matter, that I consider my brothers, where we're thinking on the same page, we have the same thoughts, and it's not always comfortable voicing some of our opinions and voicing what's going on inside of our heads, but having other men to talk to about these things is so important. And actually, that's one of the topics I've written down to make a video about. It's all about the importance of men having brothers, and that's going to live right up here as well. But anyways, moving on with the story. And then there became a point. I was finding a fairly decent level of success in my business, and then it became a point of like almost having a bit of prove it energy of going against the grain and being able to be an entrepreneur and have a business that's successful while also being a quote unquote stoner and being able to have weed as a regular part of my life for my own personal reasons and enjoyment while still being successful. There was such a heavy nuance or stereotype of people that smoked weed being associated with people that were burnouts and losers and had nothing going for them and had no ambition and had no drive and just sat around and played video games and ate Cheetos all day. And I kind of wanted to single-handedly break that stereotype. And it's funny, within my office, because of my mindset, because of my frame of mind, because of my, demeanor and my habits and the way I ate and the way I looked at things, I was getting the title of being a modern day hippie, which, if honestly being a modern day hippie means that I eat clean and I avoid chemicals and I value the importance of relationships and friendships and I seek greater introspection and want to learn more about myself, if that means being a hippie, then I guess I am a hippie. And then there came a moment in my life where I decided, you know what? I've had enough of this. I am letting go of all of this stuff. I'm letting go of the business, letting go of the income, selling the properties, and I want to start something different. I want to live a life a little bit different than what has been provided for me. And I sold everything I owned and I moved to Mexico. And before I moved, I had a really bad knee injury that had me sidelined from pretty much all physical activity. It had me on crutches for about 2 weeks. And I think I used that as an excuse to smoke more weed more often. And then that habit carried forward while I was in Mexico for the first probably year or so. I was smoking it a lot and it almost became a bit of a crutch. And later on in this video, I'll explain why it was a crutch because of what it actually does to your body and your brain. Okay, so let's talk about what the experts say about marijuana. And by experts, I mean different colleges, different medical review papers, different studies. So in this, we're talking about medical marijuana. Weed is made up of a bunch of different compounds. There's THC, there's CBD being the two big ones, but there's tons of other cannabinoids inside of weed that they're finding medical uses for that are seeming to help a lot of people. So I don't think it's fair to underplay the drastic impact that the marijuana or hemp industry has had in the medical field. Like I'm just looking at a NCBI or a NIH document right now, looking at a bunch of different areas in which they've been doing studies to see how relevant it is that marijuana or other cannabinoids are helping with people. So here's the list. And just note that just because I'm listing out this doesn't mean that it's proven that it's a benefit. It's things that they've been studying to see if it's a benefit. Some of these showed inconclusive evidence or not enough evidence to support a direct claim or whatever, but this is just the list that they've studied. Chronic pain, cancer, chemotherapy-induced nausea and vomiting, anorexia and weight loss, irritable bowel syndrome, epilepsy, multiple sclerosis and spinal cord injury, Tourette syndrome, Huntington's disease, Parkinson's disease, dystonia, dementia. I'd be curious to know how it fixes dementia. Glaucoma, which is one I've heard about, addiction, anxiety, depression, sleep disorders, post-traumatic stress disorder, schizophrenia, and other psychoses. And we all know how big the CBD world is for pain relief in general. And it's honestly a shame what government did to big weed or big hemp or whatever you want to call that industry, because it wasn't just weed for smoking anymore. You're talking about an entire industry where they can get so many different products and so many different utilities from growing one type of plant. So when the government came in, at least this is how it went in Canada, they came in and they heavily regulated it and made businesses jump through hoops, and a lot of businesses spent a lot of money jumping through these hoops to be running ethically and legally and with all their paperwork in order. And some companies were doing really well. There were some big companies that were growing quite rapidly and making lots of money. And then the government clamped down even more and only endorsed certain growing operations. Then they started housing their own growing operations. And then they came in and literally undercut the entire industry. And these government-funded businesses are running from ginormous deficits every year, and no one knows how they're getting away with it because they're undercutting everyone. Everyone else is going out of business. I know so many people that were either owners or operators or worked at different weed companies that were all running legit. They got buried by government undercutting and of course regulations. Like, what's that all about? And we're not just talking about your local drug dealer. These were legitimate businesses. These were legitimate grade A laboratories, right? So there are lots of known benefits in the medical world for weed. So one of the things that is bad for men particularly because it's bad for your testosterone generation. And then there's a couple of more obvious things like people always getting the munchies. It inhibits bad eating habits. And there is a reason for this. And part of that is the dopamine dump that marijuana gives you. It makes everything just a little bit more enjoyable. It makes food taste better. It makes sounds and things that are visual just a little bit more crisp. And even sex, it makes it a little bit better as well. That's what I experienced. And that's one of the reasons why I kind of wanted to stop and slow down my usage, because I don't want to be getting my dopamine from outside sources. I talked about this in my last video about food. I don't want to be getting my dopamine from outside sources or having it be enhanced by another substance outside of myself. I don't want to rely on having to take another substance in order to get the dopamine, a desire to feel things. And another thing it does, it's a disassociative, just like I talked about in the video right here about coffee. It does the same thing with your hippocampus where it alters how your hippocampus works in storing memories and in tying them to emotions, which makes it a disassociative because you remember things, you take things that you experience throughout the day and they get in the hippocampus, they get stored as long-term memories by being tied to emotions. And weed does the same thing. And with weed particularly, I think it does really affect your memory. Now, a lot of experts say that it messes with your motor function. I didn't really find it did that much. Maybe it slowed me down a little bit. I tried playing hockey once while I was on it and it didn't go so well. And then a big thing that they talk about in all these different review studies is the psychological and emotional effect it has on people. Now, this I understand varies very differently because everyone responds differently to all these different substances. And I've seen that firsthand with people. I know people that smoked weed all day, every day during high school and out of high school. And now they can't smoke it. Anytime they smoke it, they get super anxious or get super nervous and paranoid. And it's funny because I'm like the exact opposite. I couldn't smoke it when I was younger. Then when I got to an adult age, I could smoke it no problem. So that really varies from person to person. Okay, so now let's talk a little bit about how I actually experienced it. So let's cover the good things, the things that I enjoyed about weed. So this first one wasn't so much when I smoked it on a daily basis. This is when I smoked it periodically, every now and then, like maybe a couple times a week. And that was the creativity. A lot of people use that as an excuse why they smoke weed all the time. But I found that kind of spark left when I smoked it every day. But when I just smoked it periodically, I had some great ideas. I would sit down with a pen and paper on my computer and I would write down all these ideas and write down all these different ways that I can go about doing things within my business. And they were often really good ideas and I carried forward with them right till now. One of my favorite things to do when I smoke is actually to stretch or do yoga. It allows you to be so in tune with your body and to have that focused concentration and sensation while you're doing something like stretching and yoga was just like enhancing that whole experience. And I would get such a good stretch, my body would feel so phenomenal. And then there's this other element that honestly, depending on your interpretation of it, could be a good or a bad thing, but I almost feel like it allowed you to eliminate the outside noise. Now, this is if you're able to focus while you're smoking, but if you're able to eliminate all the outside noise and keep in your own little world, and that own little world is super confident, you are confident to a point where you truly believe the sky's the limit and you're capable of doing anything you put your mind to. Now, some people may call this delusion, but I truly feel that our thoughts and our feelings and our words will help dictate our futures. Because if you don't have that capacity, then is there really free will? And like I said, my motor skills weren't really affected too much, but I'm also fairly coordinated. I've always played lots of sports and I'm very active and I'm very fit and in tune with my body. Although I could see how if someone that doesn't take care of their body so well and isn't as in tune with their body could have a little bit more troubles with their motor functions when they're high. And it's funny, the last thing I want to mention on this one, I don't know whether this is good or bad, so I'm going to put it right in the middle, but it's you're either super on and your brain is just going a mile a minute, you're having ideas, you're having thoughts, you're putting pieces together, or you're just super off and you're just a fucking slug. There never seems to be any in between. You're either way on or you're way off. Okay, so now let's cover the not so good. You might even call it the bad. So the first one being the eating habits. There were times where if I would smoke a joint, I'd be going around the house doing some things, cleaning up the kitchen at night, and then I would just start making snacks. I don't know what exactly weed does to your brain that makes you feel like you have a ginormous stomach that's empty, even if you just had a meal, but no matter what, you can always be snacking. That's why people say it gives you the munchies. So that was definitely a negative because there were times where I'd eat a whole snack and then I'd realize just how full I am. And then I would be like almost disappointed with myself. It's like, why did I eat this? I didn't need to eat this. Now I feel like shit. Now my sleep's going to be affected and that's going to affect me moving forward in the next day. Another thing I did notice is when I was smoking it every day, not only do your dreams like disappear, you don't remember your dreams, but in the morning when you wake up, I feel like it's a little bit harder to wake up and get the ball rolling. You're in bed, you're tired, you just want to sleep longer. And I don't know exactly what triggers that, but it's just an experience that I've had. And I find that when I stop smoking weed for a period of time, it's a little bit easier to get out of bed and dreams keep coming back and then they become more vivid and you actually remember them in the morning. morning. Not completely, because I don't think that ever happens to anyone unless they start writing them down, but more than if I were smoking weed before bed. So where do we sit with it now? So just like I mentioned in the video about coffee, I was kind of trying to stop smoking weed at the same time. I'm not gonna lie, if it's in the house, it's pretty difficult. But if it's not in the house, it's kind of a piece of cake. There are still some nights where I have troubles falling asleep and I have to dig within to find tools to help shut my brain off and help not think about things that are stressing me out or things I got to do tomorrow, or even just like thinking of ideas for these videos or thinking of ways to articulate a message in these videos while I'm trying to go to sleep. But I don't want to rely on an outside substance to be able to get myself to fall asleep. So I've been following other practices to help shut that brain down. Do I still like smoking weed? I do. I don't think it's a net positive, but I still do enjoy it from time to time. I do it socially with my friends, and every now and then, if I feel like I'm being called to do it, there have been a few times where I'll smoke it one time during the week and I'll get some great downloads. I'll get some great ideas for my business or something that I'm stuck on and working on. So in that moment, I feel it's a positive. And I feel like when you're not doing it every day and you're doing it a little bit more intentionally and you're only doing it at certain times or with certain people, it becomes a lot more enjoyable. And if there is an upside to it, you actually get to experience that upside, where I don't feel there is nearly as much of a upside if you're doing it every day. Again, a lot of people talk about the theory of moderation, everything in moderation, including moderation itself. Do I think weed is a net positive? No. Is it okay to do it every once in a while? Yeah, why not? So right now, where it stands, I do it 1 to 3 times a week, usually with friends. But here are the top 4 reasons why inevitably I stopped smoking weed every day and reduce it down to just a couple times a week. Number 4 is a bit of a tricky one. I don't like the fact that it's sold in government stores. Anyone who knows me personally knows I have a little bit of an issue with authority and watching how things have gone over the past 4 years and during lockdowns, how certain stores stayed open and certain stores had to close, and also how they've handled the regulation process of the marijuana industry, especially in Canada. I'm not really a big fan of. They took an industry with private business owners that were actually being able to grow and hire more people and build an industry and build a large-scale business that was bringing in money, and they came in with government regulation and basically squashed everybody. And they endorsed certain growing operations in certain factories, and only those factories were allowed to operate. They then come in and undercut all the other businesses, working at a huge deficit every year, all in the name of what? Of putting other businesses that are privately owned out of business. So that's one part of it. And the second part of it, anything that the government makes that readily available, I don't know if it's something that I want to be putting in my body. Just like coffee, just like bottled water, just like quick and convenient snacks and fast food that you can find pretty much on every street corner. And now the same way there's government marijuana stores. So if they're making it so readily available, there has to be a reason. This may be a cynical way of thinking, but if they're making it so available to people while cutting things that are good for you off, there has to be a reason. So what could some of those reasons be? Well, if they do reduce your memory and they do disassociate you from your memories and they make you slower, they make you eat worse food and make you more docile in general, that's kind of what the government wants. And therefore, if that's what the government wants us to be doing, that's the exact opposite of what I want to be doing. You can call it contrarian, you can call it having a problem with authority. I don't care. That's just one perspective. That's just one set of lenses that I'm looking at this issue with. Now, I know living in Mexico, I'm not getting my weed from a government store in Canada, but it falls under the same principles. It's still the same substance. Not to mention, like, I don't know how they're growing it. I don't know what are they doing to be able to reduce their cost, to be able to be working at a deficit. Are they adding any chemicals? Are they adding any pesticides? Are they adding things that are going to be toxic to my body? If just smoking anything isn't bad enough for you already, what else is being added to it? And simply put, I do not trust the government. So simple as that. And that is a big reason why I don't do it every day anymore. It's just sprinkled into my life every now and then. Number 3, like we talked about, is dopamine. It allows extra dopamine to flow, which makes everything more enjoyable. All that's going to do is make things when I'm sober less enjoyable over time. And I've said this before, I don't want to rely on outside substances, anything outside of myself, to create my dopamine. I want to earn my dopamine. I want to have an actual reward trigger system for my dopamine. And number 2 is the reason with sleep and waking up in the morning. I feel like I get out of bed a lot quicker and I'm able to spring up and start my day and start my brain a lot quicker when I'm not smoking it regularly. And honestly, the first one is my memory. There have been so many conversations that I've had with my wife where she looks at me and says, "Oh yeah, we talked about that while you were high. I don't expect you to remember it." And that actually breaks my heart a little bit every time she says that. And so that alone is a good enough reason to not be smoking it every day, because I don't want to have that at all. I don't want to be having conversations about anything with my wife where I don't recall every bit of it. So that's definitely the biggest one. So guys, that's pretty much it. That is my little bit of my history on weed, a little bit of my experience on weed, a little bit what it does, and my outlook on it moving forward. I'm all about being dialed and being as optimized as possible. So I don't think doing this every day is going to help me make progress in that trajectory. of being optimized. But on the same token, I don't think doing it periodically is going to affect you too much. And if you think otherwise or have other comments or concerns about weed or about your habits or want to share your story, let me know in the comments below. Happy to have a discussion about it. Or if you know facts about what it's actually doing chemically inside your body or inside your brain, I'm a perpetual student and I'd always want to know more. And it might even change my mind, which I'm very open to, seemingly unlike a lot of people. But whatever, I'm not them, they're not me, I'm my own person. And I'm here to share, grow, learn, all of it. So guys, if you like this video, give it a thumbs up. I'm making more videos just like this one, sharing my perspectives, sharing my views, sharing my insight, especially around things that are working for me to make my body and my being in this meat suit work as efficiently and effectively as possible. Being optimized is one of my favorite topics of discussion. So guys, thanks for watching, and we will see you on the next one. Leave your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.